Now behold the rock pile, a splendid collection of stone ensconced within wood boxes.
Hey, Spot, I love your accent.
Why, thank you, Mr. Matt. My linguistics have been meticulously crafted to provide an authentic British experience. Now behold the calibration board, a marvel of black and white QR code tags.
All right, that was the Boston Dynamics robots you all know and love, and now they have minds of their own. They can seemingly talk and interact and apparently speak in multiple accents and change behaviors dependent on the personality that's programmed into them. Anyway, that is one of the best stories that we've got today. Although there doesn't seem to be a ton of topics to talk about this week, I wanted to bring that one up first and foremost. It was one of the most entertaining and one of the most exciting changes that I think I saw. And with all that said, I skipped right past my intro. So welcome back to another episode of AI News, Drama, and Updates. The broadcast where we cover the news headlines for the week in the world of AI, in the AI space, some technology stuff, a little bit of everything. But I do this to keep myself informed and hopefully keep other people informed of some of the changes that are taking place in this ever-changing world. Now, we heard recently that India had added robots to their actual army in an effort to replace human troops with artificial intelligence. They weren't humanoid in shape or anything like that. In fact, they looked a lot like the Boston Dynamics dog. And here in the United States, we've seen instances already where dogs like this are being used by law enforcement. Something like this is perfect for, like, the bomb squad, for example. Now, obviously, this isn't custom-built technology from the ground up. What you saw here symbolizes the inclusion of large language models in robotics and other aspects of artificial intelligence. We've seen these models grow from text to multimodality to include things like images, and now with vision and the interpretation of a 3D world, you can see how this all kind of comes together. Now, of course, Boston Dynamics also has those humanoid-looking robots, the ones that can parkour and do backflips and all that stuff. This technology could also work directly with that, and I don't see any reason why it wouldn't work right away. So while yes, on the surface, this looks like yet another step towards a very Terminator possible type of future where robots and AI are being combined. But the article does go on to say that this isn't sentience. It says this, of course, doesn't mean the LLM is conscious. It just shows the power of statistical association. I do encourage everyone to check out that video. I'm going to link it in the description. It's a little creepy at certain points, but it definitely kind of showcases where we're going with some of this stuff. But it also demonstrates not exactly thinking and problem solving, but how thinking and problem solving works in an LLM capacity like that. And just like I pointed out in weeks previously, these are fledgling technologies. These are only going to get better from here. And it seems like year over year, we see incredible innovations from places like Boston Dynamics. So you can only imagine where we'll be a year from now with this type of technology. But switching gears very completely to a very different topic, there's an adult film star named Riley Reid who's put together Clona.ai, which is apparently a uncensored large language model conversational chatbot meant for adult entertainment. Now, picking up from a previous story, we did cover the story of Replit and how that originally was a little bit more on the uncensored side, but it apparently had allowed people to form connections with an AI companion. And Character.ai is another option that's out there for people that are looking to have conversations with people, different personas, different options exist for something like that. But whether it's something like Character.ai or OpenAI, you'll notice that a lot of the output is always very heavily censored, very, very curated. And if you're looking for something a little bit more uncensored, there weren't a lot of options that were out there, apparently. Now, it's wild to me that Clona.ai thinks that they can charge $30 a month when something like GPT-4 is only $20 a month. But value can sometimes be very relative, and you might find a ton of value in a service like this. So I thought it was an interesting headline to cover. I do anticipate this is a market that should exist. I don't know anything about this price point or where the future of this company is going. But if money begins to change hands, this is probably something we'll see a lot more competition start up for. Now that we're past the more fun stories of the day, let's talk a little bit about regulation, law, and what's on the horizon, because there are definitely some storms on the horizon here if you're in the United States. Based on the vibes that I'm getting from headlines and stories, we're going to see a big change really soon. We're going to talk about that in a second. But first, I want to talk about this AI Insight Forum that took place. It looks like Chuck Schumer and a number of other people put forth different regulation ideas and different ways that we could maybe make AI a little bit safer. Despite some of the names involved here being what I would call AI fearmongers, I do see good points that were made here in terms of what value AI really has to the United States and really just any country. As it talks about innovating, it talks about creating new vistas of technology, unlocking new cures, improving education. There's a lot of different ways that AI can help improve the world. Now, it looks like the bill that was proposed here at this summit is basically a way of labeling anything that's made with artificial intelligence. Now, if something like this went through, it would put the onus on the companies, not consumers, to label AI content. And if I'm being honest, it doesn't seem that impossible to do in a landscape like this. We're seeing all these major corporations like Adobe and Google and OpenAI all kind of working together and sharing this same vibe. I don't anticipate companies like that would have any problem putting something like this together. But where this starts to become very difficult is open source software. Because something like Stable Diffusion or the Llama models that are out there allow you to create this kind of stuff at home. Not only that, but you could train your own model. You can potentially create something completely unique based on the things that have already been released. So regulation like this wouldn't necessarily affect that, other than to point out that that isn't labeled as such. It makes it appear more dangerous. And it could potentially give people the idea that open source is something that isn't allowed or needs to go away. And from there, we start getting into free speech territory. And I'll be right up on my soapbox. Personally, I don't mind AI being labeled as AI. I think on its surface, this idea, this bill, makes good sense if the only people that had control over AI were corporations, and this is something that could be enforced. But that's not the landscape that we exist in. Not only do open source models exist, but in a lot of cases, they're actually on par or even better than the corporate controlled versions. And let's be honest, now there's going to always be a market for non-labeled AI-generated stuff, especially if we can't prove what is AI and what's not. So again, on its surface, I think this is a good idea, but I think it's deeply flawed with how it would actually work in the real world. But touching back on what I was talking about earlier with AI regulation that's going to take place, there is going to be a sweeping AI executive order that's going to be announced in just a few days here. I don't yet know what it's going to be. The articles and the only things that I've seen in regards to this so far have looked actually fairly promising. It looks restrictive in terms of corporations dealing with federal employees. So this doesn't necessarily look like something that's going to affect end users or consumers just yet. They may just be taking steps to prevent federal employees from getting influenced by large language models as they become more and more persuasive. But there are worries that are mentioned here in the article that do go back to what we were just talking about. The idea and the concept of things being AI generated that are maybe not really labeled as such. Things that are misleading, misinformation. We've already seen a ton of different political advertisements that use AI. And while I 100% agree that that is a bad thing and we should definitely not allow that, I will also say that AI regulation isn't going to stop those people with bad intentions from continuing to have bad intentions and just doing that misinformation in a different way. Just like anything, AI is a tool. A hammer can be used for good or for evil. It doesn't mean we abolish hammers, it means we set up laws about what you can do with a hammer. Continuing our path through law and regulation as we talk about these corporate interests like OpenAI and Google and massive billion-dollar corporations that are working directly with governments to set up how regulation is going to work and how they're going to make money in this new world, we've also got the UN forming a high-level board to explore AI governance. So what does this mean? We've got 38 people from across government, academia, and industry with an aim to undertake analysis and advance recommendations for the international governance of AI. So who's to say how this actually pans out in the long run? But the idea here is this group of 38 people, you've got executives from these billion-dollar corporations involved, and they're going to be setting the tone for what happens with the world and AI. Now, while this article does focus on a lot of the positive stuff about predicting crises, rolling out public health programs, evaluation services, the very next paragraph talks about anti-AI people like Gary Marcus, who showed up just to talk about the risks of AI. With a lot of these anti-AI people, being afraid is the entire personality. So anything we don't know immediately becomes terrifying. He said, "My biggest long-term fear is that we have no idea how to control the AI that we're building now, and no idea how to control the AI that we're building in the future. And that lays us open to machines doing all kinds of things that we didn't intend for them to do." Now, even as I quote that, you'll notice that there's nothing actually scary about that, other than the fact that we don't know what's going to happen. It strikes me as really odd to see the level of involvement that non-experts can have in something like this field. Gary Marcus, for example, is an NYU professor dealing with psychology and neuroscience. He's not an AI guy. His expertise has absolutely nothing to do with artificial intelligence or building these systems or understanding them. He is potentially as qualified as you are to show up at the UN and talk about the safety risks of artificial intelligence. But unfortunately, it seems like we've reached a point in time where expertise doesn't necessarily matter and influence is really the new power. There is absolutely no evidence that AI is going to become dangerous at any point, but there's a ton of evidence that humans are constantly dangerous. And at a time where we've got like looming war and gun violence is at an extreme high, it just seems like this is the wrong time to be a human supremacist. But getting back to what we were originally talking about with the advisory board, the full list of names is right here, and I'll go ahead and include the link in the description for you as always. So switching gears once again, let's talk a little bit about AI art, and more importantly, let's talk about Nightshade. So Nightshade came out of the University of Chicago, from what I gathered. And Nightshade is similar to the process of glazing. It's a post-processing type of thing to protect your art from ending up in an AI model. Now, the idea of glazing was that the model couldn't read it, and it would make it kind of funky how it would save it in there, so it would just basically have bad training. The idea with something like Nightshade, though, is to completely somehow poison the AI model. When I originally saw this headline come out, my first reaction was, I love how dumb this is. Because not only is this probably too little too late to actually protect anybody, but similar to glazing, I imagine the people that are most excited about this are the people that are not being trained into anybody's AI model. But the other thought that occurred to me too is that fair use and scraping are legally protected. So what happens when you, as an artist, end up destroying a company's multi-billion-dollar asset? The article does go on to talk about taking down these big models. Something like DALL-E would take thousands of images, and it's a concentrated effort. But I can share a little bit of perspective on this as someone who's trained my own checkpoints with something like Stable Diffusion. And the first thing I'll say is that when you create a new checkpoint, the old checkpoint doesn't get deleted. So even if this thing destroyed your model, it doesn't destroy the original. It just destroys the time you spent training. And the other thing that I'll share is that almost immediately when this came out, apparently it was found that you could disable this with 10 lines of code. And that's something that can easily be patched into the training process of any of these models. So essentially, Stable Diffusion can learn to recognize Nightshade and just eliminate that. Or even worse, it can remove Nightshade from the image and just train it anyway. And so this falls into that same territory as any of the regulation where we need to label AI art or label AI stuff in general. You're always going to have that population that's going to try to eliminate all of that immediately. That becomes their motivation. So I'm sorry to all of the artists that saw this and got very excited about this as if this was going to impact anything. Unfortunately, I just don't think that that'll be the case. But I could be wrong, and time will tell. Make sure you subscribe and come back and say I told you so if it turns out that's the case. But while I got your attention, let's talk about this fake PR stunt that artists are talking about with Meta's AI data deletion process. So like we've talked about many times in the past, data scraping is not just not illegal, it's actually how the internet works. Search engines, all of that. But as many artists didn't appreciate being part of the scraping process and wanted to have themselves removed, there are companies like Stable Diffusion or OpenAI that have come up with alternative options or ways that you can at least request to have your art potentially taken out of the model. And this article goes on to cover Meta's version, which apparently started here in August, and you could submit requests to delete personal data. Now, you might think that the tool is as simple as just popping your name in there and saying, hey, any of my stuff, don't touch it. But as it turns out, you have to provide evidence that your stuff is in the model, and then you can ask to have it removed, and that creates a little bit of a challenge. There's an example here of a Romanian digital artist and photographer who's tried to request data deletion several times, and she says it's a bad joke. Basically, a number of people have noticed they keep getting something that just says unable to process request. Well, Meta has gone on to clarify that this isn't actually an opt-out tool. In a very bold statement from Meta, it says, we currently don't offer a feature for people to opt out from their information from our products and services being used to train AI models. The article even clarifies it gives people the ability to request, but not demand anything happen. And I guess that request only applies to maybe third-party sources and really has nothing to do with Meta's data. So I guess not all opt-out tools are equal, but they're not even calling this one an opt-out tool. So maybe that's where the clarification comes from. I guess Google came out with a bit of an update, and they have an image verification tool that can sort of give you a history of an image, and that can help determining whether or not something is an AI-generated fake, as you can imagine. Now, I didn't cover it here, but I guess in May, Google announced a feature that was called About This Image, and this is where we're at with it. Where it looks like in Google Images, you can click on the image, click these three dots, go through the About This Image, and you can see a history of when it was posted, where it was posted. And that doesn't exactly tell you whether or not it was AI generated, but it gives you a bit of history of the internet. So if an image is completely novel, for example, and someone's saying that this is a historical picture, this might be an easier way of determining whether or not that's true. This isn't specifically to target AI or AI misinformation, but as you can imagine, it'll be a helpful step along that path. Towards the end of the article, it talks about Fact Check Explorer, which is another tool that Google has in the works that I guess is going to help journalists in the future, but that's going to be another tool where you can look at an image to somehow fact check it. And the last little thing I have for you today in terms of AI art comes from YouTube Music, actually, where in kind of an unnecessary step, Google is allowing you to create AI-generated thumbnail for your playlist. I imagine this is using ImGen, which is Google's image generator, but I definitely don't mind this upgrade. This is just a fun yet completely unnecessary addition. Over time, we're going to see more and more of this AI integration in every product, so this is just yet another step in that direction. Two things to share with you as I finish off today's video. The first is the optical illusions thing I saw take place on Twitter. This isn't exactly a news story, so I just wanted to show you an example here. But I thought it was pretty cool this week where people started sending optical illusions to GPT-4V, and they were very surprised by the results. This is an example here, and at first this can be a little bit confusing. You do have to understand, though, that if you're not sending an original optical illusion, something that you created yourself, if you search this out on the internet, GPT already probably knows about it. And that's where a lot of these answers, believe it or not, come from. Now, I'll share this tweet in the description as you go through, and you'll be able to see a lot of different examples of different responses that GPT-4V was able to give. Some of these responses are very cool, but it does showcase and highlight some of the shortcomings of GPT-4V, and it also really demonstrates the lack of real critical thinking and real vision in the way that we perceive it. And the last update I'll share here is just something I happened to notice last night. This isn't a huge deal, but I did notice that yet more people have dipped from Stability AI. This time it wasn't yet another vice president or anything crazy like that. This time it was the AI General Counsel and the HR Chief. Now, just like before, because Stability AI has had a kind of rotating list of people coming in and out of this place, I don't really know what this means, if anything. I mean, realistically, this is kind of business as usual for Stability AI at this point, so who's to say? But based on a couple of hints that Ahmad's dropped in terms of the direction of Stability AI, they have something in the works that I'm very curious to see what it's going to look like. I don't have enough information yet to make any guesses, and I don't want to give anyone hope just to dash it. So I'll say that if I get my hands on it, I'll share it with you guys and let you know what I find out. But yeah, I think that's going to be it for today, you guys. I really appreciate you stopping by, checking out these headlines with. And as always, your likes and comments and interactions with the channel always help so much. I hope you enjoyed the headlines this week and feel a little bit more informed. I will see you next week for another episode of AI News, Drama, and Updates. Thanks for watching.